Thomas. I moved to Australia in 2016 with my wife and 2 kids, and I then joined a company called ESL, which is an esports tournament organizer. And I worked for them as general manager for APJ, based here in Sydney. I've now gone back to what I used to do before, which is transactions and investments. So I now advise game developers and game-related companies on fundraising and M&A and strategy. So I'm also working on several investment structures for this industry, including a venture capital fund, which is to be reality soon. So that's the intro. Don't hesitate to reach out to me after this event if you have any questions about gaming or anything else for that matter. I'm very, very active on LinkedIn, so that's probably the best way if we're not already connected there. Again, thanks for joining. Now I'm going to introduce Roger, who's going to be my co-speaker today. So Roger moved to Australia even long before me in 2005, when he took on the role as managing director for Warner Bros. He first began working in the games industry in 2005, which was when Warner Bros. Created created the interactive entertainment, and he went on to create WBIE Asia Pacific office based in Sydney. He then founded a game publisher and distributor called 18.2 in 2016. 18.2 was later acquired by a company called Koch Media in 2019. And Koch Media is part of Swedish games group Embracer. So there's a very strong connection here to Sweden, obviously. Roger, if you don't know Roger, he's a local industry legend. And he will tell us more about Embracer later in the call. Roger is also the chairman of IGEA, which stands for Interactive Games and Entertainment Association here in Australia. And I saw, thanks for joining you too, that there are some people joining from IGA as well. Through IGA, Roger spearheaded something that's going to make a huge change for the industry here in Australia. And that was the push for a tax incentive. Roger will go into more detail about it, but it's a tax incentive for game developers, which is fantastic. So Roger's also a great guy, so look him up if you have a chance. And thank you, Roger, for joining today. Now over to you if you want to say a few words about yourself.
Thank you, Thomas, for that lovely introduction. I guess the first thing to talk about is that I just happened to be in the chair role at IGEA when the digital games tax offset came into place. That effort has been an ongoing effort across many years with people from the IGEA team, so Ron Curry and his team, people who have been board members previously and who are current board members, as well as people from member companies. So it's been very much a team effort, and much as I'm very happy to take credit for other people's endeavours, in this case, it wouldn't be right. So that tax offset that we're going to talk about a little bit later on is as I say, it's a real collective effort across a number of years. So I want to make sure that everyone knows that. If only I were the guy that could move the federal government with the click of my fingers, but I'm not. Okay, thanks, Roger. So let's get into it. So I'll start with just painting a bigger picture of the global gaming market and how much it's worth and where all that money is coming from.
And then we'll go into a few questions for Roger as we go along. So global gaming market is huge, right? And if you're not in this industry, you may not know how big it is. In 2021, the global value of the gaming market is $160 billion US. So, and it's growing, and it's forecasted to grow to even bigger numbers in the coming years. So $160 billion, just to put that into perspective, that's almost 3 times what the global film and music industries together are worth. So it's massive. It's clearly the new big form of entertainment. And we'll talk a bit more later about why this is growing, but I think this is a good opportunity to ask the first question for you, Roger. It must be great to be in such a fast-growing industry. When you started in this industry, in gaming, did you ever dream this would happen and it would have this growth curve?
No, and I think partly that's because of my age. My journey in video games started like a lot of people of my vintage in the early 80s in arcades. Games like Space Invaders and Pac-Man, and then kind of segueing at home to the Atari 2600, which I loved, and in a kind of strange twist of fate, Atari at that point was actually owned by Warner Communications, as they were called then, which is Warner Brothers, or was Warner Brothers, and I guess that's there's some kind of strange destiny in play there, given the direction that my career took. Then I moved to the PlayStation, the original PlayStation, the grey one, playing a game called Siphon Filter, which I loved. I've got really fond memories of that game. I remember fighting with my brothers for the controller. That's probably my favorite game ever. And the thing of it is, like, I think often shared experiences it's not really just about the game. I've played better games. I've played more challenging games, and I've played more immersive games, but I don't think any of them will ever kind of impact me in the same way, because that game the memories of that game take me back to that moment in time, that kind of shared experience with my 2 brothers. It's a treasured memory, fighting over the controller, it's that's really my favorite game, and that's the reason why. Although that said, Defender, which was an arcade game from a company called Williams Electronics, comes a pretty close second. That said, to be working in an industry where you've got compound annual growth rates in kind of mid-single digits, most businesses, most industries would kill to be in that space. And I think it's a real privilege to be in a business that is in growth and does deliver such enjoyment and pleasure to so many people.
So if you, so 176 billion today, and forecast to 220 billion in just 3 years' time. What do you think is driving this development? I mean, I'm guessing access to technology, broadband, and devices, but I'm sure there's more to it.
Well, you might argue that broadband isn't a factor in Australia, but tongue in cheek. But look, I think it's definitely about technology. I mean, technology is very much enabling access to content, particularly when we do consider smartphones. That's been, I think, absolutely key when we talk about what has been, you know, this incredible growth trajectory for the industry. And I think at the same time, what we need to do is remember that, you know, we can talk about the growth, but we have to remember that the thing that's equally important is actually as well the evolution of the gamer. I think you can argue that that evolution has been driven by the prevalence of technology, as well as the sheer diversity of games and experiences that are available. But, you know, you think about that tired stereotype of gamers, you know, being male, in their mid-20s, living in their mum and dad's basement. I mean, that is so far removed from reality now that it, you know, it kind of speaks to the scale of the industry. You know, often when you talk to people about the industry when they're not in the middle of it, and I guess as a somebody who's firmly embedded in the industry, sometimes you forget, when you tell people that by 2024 the industry will be 3 times the size of music and film combined, people kind of look at you like you must have a broken calculator, you know. But, you know, when we talk about Australia specifically, this kind of gives some context, I think, to the scale of the industry. In Australia, the average age of a gamer is 34. You know, it isn't someone in their, you know, in their late teens or their early 20s. The average age of a gamer is 34. And I think when this statistic is also particularly telling, 47% of gamers are female. So again, you know, it kind of confounds sometimes the expectations I think that people have. And then when we look at kind of the age of gamers in terms of, you know, older demographics, you know, 42% of people who play games are 65% and older. So when we, you know, when you think about that kind of discussion around mobile devices, and you think about the broad demographic that gamers are comprised of. I mean, if you think about Candy Crush, for example, you think about Words with Friends, those 2 games, I think they're great examples of the kind of appeal that gaming, I shouldn't say gaming actually, because we want to differentiate ourselves from pokies, but, you know, the kind of appeal that games do have that transcends demographics. And again, on the mobile side of things, that kind of speaks to the way in which, you know, the popularity and ubiquity of smartphones goes hand in hand with that incredible kind of 50% of gaming value being represented by mobile phones. I think from the point of view of, you know, other platforms, when we step away from mobile gaming, if we talk about PC, for example, or console-based games, one of the key factors in terms of the evolution of gamers that enjoy game product on those platforms is that we've kind of moved from what used to be largely a quite solitary, single-player, narrative-driven experience to now the kind of experiences that represent shared experiences, actually represented by games like PUBG, by Fortnite, by Apex Legends. There are many games now, whether they are free to play or they're more traditional in terms of the commercial model that brings them to market. They, you know, more and more games now include these multiplayer experiences that are either player versus player or they're player versus environment. You know, you've got games like Call of Duty Warzone, you've got The Division, you know, there are a ton of them out there. But, you know, the experience that gamers now enjoy versus 5 years ago is meaningfully difficult. Meaningfully different. And that's, I think, part of the way in which the industry is growing is being driven by these new entrants. I think what's also key here is that 2021 is not going to be bigger than 2020. Now, when you look at the industry in 2020, every single calendar year quarter in 2020 was bigger than its 2019 equivalent. And that's really unusual, because often what happens is that Q2 calendar and Q3 are lower, simply because you've got, product that is, stacked up towards Christmas into January and then Q4. And typically, we wouldn't see kind of quarters growing quarter on quarter within a single year, which is what we saw in 2020. When we think about 2021, the first half of the year has seen a decline in spending. What's important though, I think, for us as an industry is to understand why, what are the factors that sit behind that decline. And part of it is, and a large part of it, in fact, is the impact of COVID and the challenge it has represented for games developers. I think in common with most businesses, when we shifted to working from home and from the kind of, into that lockdown scenario, there was limited impact on our ability to develop and to deliver as development studios. And what has happened over time is that the kind of impact of lockdown has come to bear on the creative process, if you like, because it's really quite fundamental to that creative process that you need to have people together in the same room. I think we're all now experiencing Zoom, Teams, whatever flavor of video conferencing and meeting tools you use. We're all kind of starting to experience that fatigue. And part of the challenge when you're in a creative industry is when you can't be together and that creativity isn't sparked by that interaction, that dynamic tension that comes from, often, people disagreeing with your vision, perhaps. That has impacted development. And when you look at new releases that are kind of delayed, you've got and here's just a short list for everyone. So Deathloop from Bethesda, Gran Turismo 7 from Microsoft, Hogwarts Legacy and Gotham Knights from Warner Brothers, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 from our Swedish friends at Paradox, Dying Light 2 from Techland in Poland, and the list does go on and on. And it is not, when you think about that creative process that needs to be in play, I don't think it's surprising that we've seen the delays. That said, though, I mean, again, we're not in the most challenging position, because if you think about something like film content, for example, you need to bring, if you're making a movie, if you're creating some TV content, you have to bring a group of people together, behind and in front of the camera. The challenges that the kind of screen industry's had compared to where we sit as an industry has been, that's been much more challenging. There's a great example, I think, of, a team that has worked on a Warner Brothers TV product for a long time, actually turning the challenge of lockdown to their, if you like, to allow their creative juices to flow. There's a series called The Blacklist, which has got James Spader in it. And the last, not the last season, the one before, kind of got impacted by lockdown. I think it's filmed in Vancouver. It got impacted by lockdown. And basically, the middle of the season, the episode before they went on lockdown hiatus had been partially filmed. And they actually finished the episode remotely by having the talent call in on Zoom calls to do their voiceovers on the top of a animated kind of film strip, if you like. So, you know, you've got this, and it's kind of interesting because you're in this space now where, you know, largely all screen content is starting to converge to some extent. You know, you look at some games, the Ghost of Tsushima, for example, from Sony, which is, you know, when you watch it and when you play it on PlayStation 5, is almost like watching a movie, you know. So that kind of that challenge has not been the one that we've had, but certainly in 2021 we're going to see that, I think, impact us from the point of view of the availability of products. Certainly, you know, we'll see stuff in the second half of this year calendar and then into 22. You know, I think part of the issue as well has been around supply chain. Like everyone else, chip manufacturers really impacted, and the limitations there really impacted the gaming industry. Consoles, the new consoles, PlayStation 5 and the Xbox, have been on allocation. And I think whilst we've not been alone in terms of those challenges, they've certainly been difficult to manage for the hardware providers. You know, the forecast for 2024, where we've got, you know, nearly 220 billion US as a market size, I think it will be close to that. It will be triple music and film combined. So while we will have this hangover this year presented by the pandemic, you know, the flip side of the coin is that we've had many new gamers join us in the world of games. You know, there are new players who are basically kind of joining the audience, and I think, to be honest, now we're further from those kind of, you know, outdated stereotypes about who gamers are and what they are. And the industry is in a great place, is in a really positive space.
Should we, maybe we should talk a little bit about how the, yeah, I'm going to mention this number a few times, the 176 billion. That's all you're going to take home with you. Some people talking about a very big US dollar number, but maybe we can talk briefly about how consumers spend, you know, where they spend that money, because you mentioned consoles and also you also mentioned mobile, and mobile is, yeah, it's crazy, right? It's already at over 50% of the value of the consumer spend. But sometimes, at least I get, you know, blinded by mobile. Everybody wants to be on mobile, but you have to remember that console is still a $49 billion industry, and that does not include the actual hardware. That's the software and the money that consumers spend inside the games. And then you have PC at 20%, 36 billion. So they're all crazy big, right? And yeah, and like I said, your consoles, the actual hardware sales, phones, PlayStation, Xboxes, Nintendo Switches, etc. That comes on top of that. But that's a different topic. So I wanted to hear your view on this, Roger. You mentioned the pandemic and the effect it has had on the industry. Has it affected all platforms the same, or are there any differences?
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. I mean, this, when we talk about mobile at kind of 91 billion, up, it's up nearly 5%, versus kind of prior year in terms of that spend. The thing about mobile is that it is a much lower barrier to entry than console or PC. It is a device that people feel like they need to have, versus sometimes a console, which can be, or a gaming PC that people can, maybe consider a luxury. And growth in mobile is driven, the high rates of growth are the Middle East, they are Latin America, they are Southeast Asia. So, that lower kind of barrier to entry, not necessarily in terms of price, because, phones can be expensive, but they are multi-function devices. There's definitely a case to be made that mobile gaming has been much less affected by the pandemic. Part of it as well is that the hardware install base is already out there. There's a huge install base in terms of smartphones. And that, I think, speaks to the 91 billion. I think one of the other factors in play as well, though, is that there are quite a few publishers now who are looking at their existing PC or console-based IPs, and they're looking to push those IPs out onto mobile. And things like COD, for example, Call of Duty from Activision, and that, I think, is a phenomenon that will continue to be apparent, and I think that will, continue to allow mobile to show strong growth.
I've run into Embracer a few times, and obviously from Sweden, and Koch Media being part of that group. I just want to ask, so mobile's growing, and it's like you said, it's forecasted to grow even more. Koch Media you focus on PC and console. Can you talk a little bit about why aren't you just switching to all mobile?
I think part of, well, the answer to that from the Koch Media perspective is that we are good at console and PC. And that is where our expertise and our core skills lie. That's where our development studios like Volition in the US or Dambusters in the UK, that's what they're good at. So it's our core competency. Saints Row, which announced at Gamescom yesterday, that's a PC and console release. When you talk about mobile games, to be successful, you really, really need to know what you're doing. You have to be an expert. You have to have a team that is completely immersed in that field. For every successful mobile game, there are many, many, many games which fall by the wayside. And to your point about Embracer and mobile, one of our recent acquisitions was EasyBrain. They are a leading mobile games developer. They're 230 people in the team, and their core focus is puzzle and logic game titles on mobile. They are a technology-driven company. They have an in-house proprietary platform, and they're operating 15 games concurrently. 15 live games concurrently. They've got 750 million installs, and 12 million daily users across those 15 games. And the revenue model there is predominantly through advertising revenue.
Yeah.
And when you think about when you think about a Clash of Clans, when you think about a Candy Crush, when you think about, an easy brain game like Sudoku, for example, the amount of work behind the scenes to, allow that game to cut through, given the challenge of being somewhere on the App Store or on the Android store, you need to be really good at this stuff. So that, I think for us, that's the strategy. We work in the space across each of the 8 operating units under the Embracer banner in the spaces that make sense to us.
Okay, so you sort of touched upon the business models for mobile, and I mean the dominant one is free to play, and that started in the late 90s or early 2000s. Can you explain just a little bit more about free to play? And I assume that's one of the success factors for the growth of mobile gaming.
Yeah, absolutely. There is no doubt at all that free to play is a key aspect of the kind of success that mobile gaming enjoys. Although, when we, not to put too fine a point on it, when we talk about consumer spending of 91 billion US, free to play sounds a bit weird. So, the model itself, largely speaking, is around keeping consumers playing the game. So there is typically a massive focus on consumer data and the insights that come from understanding player behavior. And to be a successful developer and a publisher in the mobile space, you have to be a data scientist. Large publishers and smaller developers who are self-publishing will have teams that do nothing other than analyze consumer behavior. They will adapt the games that they have on platform. And, in terms of the monetization models, they base them on the consumer behavior. It can be, advertising, or it can be microtransactions, it can be in-game currency, but certainly, a lot of the games are free to play, and consumers choose to enhance their experience by, engaging further and rewarding a developer for putting all of that time and that effort into creating a great game. And if they want to kind of spend on that game, that's great. But free to play is certainly the thing that really moved the needle around mobile in the first instance, for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've spoken to several people who, during the early phases of the releases of the games, when they test the games, they test the monetization models and they also test the games. But it's not just about adapting the monetization models to fit the game. They actually do it the other way around too. So you adapt your actual game and the gameplay to work with the kind of monetization that you want again, which is, you need to be a data scientist to do that. So, but if free to play is so good, I mean, it's coming to other platforms as well, right?
Yeah, free to play certainly models, they are becoming more prevalent across console. They're stepping away from mobile and tablet now. One of the great things actually about the industry and the content that we bring to market is that we are a broad church. There are free-to-play shared experiences like Fortnite that you can enjoy without spending a cent. But if you want to engage further and to spend on platform, you can. But the other thing that's, I think, really, because there is an awful lot of discussion right now about multiplayer, online, free-to-play games, you know, certainly in that battle royale genre, and sometimes, you know, the kind of those different experiences, the kind of if you like, those perhaps more immersive, older kind of experiences, you know, where people spend their time in a single player narrative-based game, you know, have, you know, they're sometimes perhaps not spoken enough about at the moment. Partly that's because a lot of stuff's been delayed, I think. But, you know, we, as you know, we're a really broad church. And, you know, the great thing about the industry is there's really something for everyone.
Conscious of time, I think maybe we move on and talk a little bit about who the really big fish are in gaming. So all that consumer spend, if you look at the top 5 revenue generators in this industry, there will be very familiar names. So the top 5 will include Sony, Apple, Microsoft, and Google. So that's not surprising. If you're in the industry, you will also be very familiar with the absolute number 1, which is a company from China called Tencent. And Tencent was founded in 1998 by, and they were also funded by venture capital. It's known as the world's best venture capital investment ever, which was done by South African Naspers in 2001. Tencent, so they're so big now, they have very much a platform view on gaming, and that's their background is platforms. But they've done it so well. It's such, there's such a big force now, and they've managed to go not just dominate China, but also have a very large share of the gaming market globally. So they today are valued at 540 billion US. So they're big. On that list, the top 5 I've just mentioned, if you look a bit further down the top 100 list, we get to the first Australian one at number 27, which is a company you probably know of called Aristocrat. They have their background in slot machines and pokies, but they're also moving into mobile gaming. And they recently actually acquired 2 mobile studios and started a 3rd one. So they're really on the move. And then we have 5 companies on the top 100 list from Sweden. Top of that list is Embracer. And then we have Stillfront, MTG, which you probably know, that's TV3 and the Kinnevik Group. Swedish people would know them. And then Paradox and a company called G5. So lots of Swedish companies, I would say, on the top 100, in particular, if you consider the relatively small population.
Tomas, can I just ask you, do you want to share that slide? Is that possible with the list and the value for the revenue?
Yeah, I can. Well, I'm happy to. You can see how big they are, Tencent. So I'll continue. So you see Embracer, they're a fantastic company, and revenue here is actually pretty impressive, but it's going to be 2021. These are 2020 numbers. 2021 is going to be, it's going to show a huge growth even from that number. So maybe you want to say a few more words, Roger, about Embracer. You have it's a very special organization, a very interesting success story.
Yeah, it is, and 2021, I think we'll see a milestone for Embracer. I think we'll hit kind of significant numbers. The revenue growth so far has been pretty impressive this year. We are, so Embracer is the parent company for Koch Media that I am the managing director of here in ANZ. And you know, across the core business for us, as we've already talked about, it's the development and publishing of PC, console, and mobile games. We've got a catalogue of over 240 franchises, things like Saints Row, Goat Simulator, which is a mobile game and now a console and PC release as well. Dead Island, Darksiders, Metro, Kingdoms of Amalur. There are many storied and well-known franchises and properties within the group's catalogue. You know, our CEO is Lars Wingefors, who has, and you can't talk about Embracer without Lars is Embracer. The head office of the business is in Karlstad in Sweden, where Lars grew up, and the office is in it's an unassuming block of flats, really, and the office is in there. You know, you're not in, you know, it's not in Geneva or Santa Monica, and it's not, you know, a giant marble lobby. It's a very very unassuming property. We've now got 8 operative groups within the Embracer organization. THQ Nordic, who are based in Vienna, Koch Media, who are based in Hamburg, with then Deep Silver. We have 5-6 studios now under the Deep Silver banner across various geographies. We've got Coffee Stain, who are also Swedish. Amplifier Game Invest, which is our kind of VC angel investor fund that is also based in Sweden. We have Saber Interactive in the US. We have Deca Games, who are they're a mobile games expert. Recent acquisitions, 2 of those, Gearbox Entertainment, who most people in the industry would know, and for those of you who don't, they're the makers of the Borderlands franchises, and then Easy Brain that we talked about a few minutes ago, who are really in that mobile space. Internally, we've got 80 game development studios with more than 8,500 employees, and we're in more than 40 countries. Mergers and acquisitions have been a really key part of the creation of the Embracer Group, and I think something that's good to highlight at this point is that we do not need, as a business, to acquire further businesses in order to grow. You know, when you look at a business that has 80 game development studios and 240 owned franchises, our challenge at the moment is getting enough developers in play to be able to work with all of those franchises. We've got way more product than we can work on at present. So while we don't need acquisitions to grow in the future, that we will. The strategy is for the group to continue on the M&A path and add more publishers, more studios, and more IPs. As a business, you know, that drive to achieve further diversification lowers operational risk in the group, and you know, the strategy is to create value by acquiring the right companies at the right price. We and Lars and his exec team and the Embracer philosophy is that we can add value to acquired companies by helping them to make more and better games. And Lars puts it in a really simple way. In other words, we buy to build. We have a really decentralized governance model where local management is empowered and I can speak to that personally since the acquisition by Koch. 2.5 years ago, and having spent time with my colleagues from Embracer, I can certainly say that this kind of approach of, you know, buy great businesses with strong management and great leadership, and, you know, get the hell out of their way whilst making sure they have the resources that they need in order to be successful is really very much where the business is at. I mean, Lars, his first endeavor was basically, he had a collection of comics that he started a used comic business with at 13. And basically kind of worked on his comic business, and then moved into video games from there, because he realized that video games were selling at higher prices than comics. He dropped out of high school, and 4 years after he kind of first started selling video games, he had his business in Karlstad with a revenue of about 100 million kroner at the time, about 10 million GBP. By 22, he was operating Sweden's largest independent wholesaling games business. Then the business is acquired by a British .com startup called Gameplay, and unfortunately the .com bubble burst at that point. So he then spent a few years working on the games business and transformed it, restarted the business under the name of Game Outlet Europe, moved away from working in any way with new releases and focused on catalog. The company went very, very well, then established a publishing brand called Nordic Games. And then in 2011, he acquired assets of a company called Joe Wood that had gone into receivership, which is really where I think the Embracer Group journey started. Nordic Games then acquired assets from THQ, things like Red Faction and Darksiders, which are well known in the games industry. And you know, by 2016, the company became public and was listed on the Nasdaq First North in Stockholm. And you know, since then, the business has continued to grow in scale. And has continued to succeed and, you know, defy perhaps expectations. So, you know, that's kind of the background of the business, Thomas.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Thank you very much, Roger. So I'm moving ahead. Just a quick some thoughts about, you know, Australia and Sweden in the gaming context. So the spend is around 3 times larger than that of Sweden. So the consumer spend, which, yes, it's almost in line with the population. So the Australian spend is around 2.3 billion every year. Australia has 13 million roughly players, and Sweden has 6. So if you do the math, that means that Australians are much better spenders on the games they like. And yeah, we will maybe, if we have time, we'll touch upon how gaming and game preferences differ between cultures. But this is just an interesting fact that different cultures spend more and spend differently on games. So now that we're talking about Australia, I think we really want to make sure we have time to cover the recent federal government's recent announcement in May. It was about the tax incentive to support the local gaming industry. So it would be great to hear, because I know you, as we said when we started, you were very much involved in that, Roger. If you want to say a few words about that incentive.
Yeah, the announcement of the digital games tax offset of the budget recently, it was a real watershed moment for the development industry in Australia. We have, as you said, have been largely underrepresented in game development for quite a few years. And the history of the development industry in kind of the broadest terms in Australia was that there were a number of very, very successful AAA studios based in Australia up until the GFC hit. There was an awful lot of talent in the country, and the GFC hit, and the Aussie dollar was not in the place it needed to be, and largely all of those studios closed. And a couple of things happened. Either the talent that was in play in those studios set up on their own and began to create games locally, or that talent, and this is kind of a bit of a challenge for us as we, and I'll come back to talk about the challenge around Australians who left Australia to go and work in other countries' development businesses, industries. You know, we ended up, based on, you know, the efforts of largely state government with a development industry that was largely structured to deliver mobile games. That's because mobile games are faster to bring to market, they're less complex, they're less expensive, and you know, if you're bankrolling yourself, then mobile games is a really attractive option. What it did mean was that in terms of those very successful Australian development businesses that were able to succeed in spite of there being no level playing field in terms of a tax offset versus somewhere like Canada, for example, or the UK or Germany, or there were many examples, or for example, low cost countries like Poland, for example, and the Czech Republic. You know, Czech Republic has few to no incentives in the development space, but it is a really low cost environment for development. And so any studio, and we have a number here that have been successful, people like Mighty Kingdom, for example, people like League of Geeks, who, along with a whole raft of other studios, too numerous to mention. But if you imagine a business that operates at a 30% disadvantage versus, you know, development studios in other jurisdictions, you can, I think, pretty much guess straight away that there's some real talent in Australia. You know, the kind of overarching themes that sometimes we talk about are those of being solution oriented, being creative, you know, being, you know, super hardworking, you know, and highly productive. You know, if studios can be successful and can be successful businesses with those, you know, playing in a global marketplace, because we do, you know, one of the flip sides of being a business that is largely technology focused, you know, jobs can be done anywhere. So where we've seen these successful businesses, you know, we know that things are being done well. But the real game changer will be the launch of the federal government's tax offset. So in the broadest terms, the tax offset will be a 30% tax offset against what's called qualifying spend in any development process. So the process that's underway at the moment is that there is a consultation going on at the moment where the kind of details, the nitty-gritty of the tax offset are being talked about, because part of what's really important now is to understand what the details will be. Because, you know, qualifying spend, for example, in somewhere like the UK, for example, UK has a tax offset. You're able to spend anywhere in the EEA and that spend is legitimate in terms of being qualifying under the UK scheme. So when we talk about what the Australian scheme will look like and the value that it will bring to developers, is there are kind of two things to think about. The first is for those Australian businesses that will be able to access the offset, and there is a kind of threshold that you need to exceed in order to be able to access the fund, which is $500,000 for any one project, which you know counts out some of the smaller businesses, some of the smaller indies, but certainly is achievable for some of the mid-tier businesses. And by the way, as a side note, those smaller indie businesses, those smaller studios will benefit from the tax offset indirectly, even if they can't access it, because the pool of talent that we will have as, you know, Australians return from overseas, as overseas talent comes to Australia to kind of take advantage of the opportunities that will be here. Those things, you know, all boats will rise, I think. But then when we talk about overseas studios, so if we talk about, for example, Embracer looking at the opportunity to open a studio in Australia, part of what's important again is that we're in a global marketplace, and the way in which the tax offset is structured, the details are key in order to be able to, you know, for Australia to be competitive with a Canada, for example. We almost, as a country, I think we almost need to go above and beyond, simply because we already have a Canada, and we already have, you know, the UK and Germany and other jurisdictions. So we don't have the opportunity to kind of drive that first mover advantage, you know, and you know, we don't, you know, why move from Sweden? If you're Embracer and you're talking about Coffee Stain, you know, would you open a studio in, you know, hypothetically in Australia? Why would you, if the, you know, if there is not an advantage? So it's almost kind of from the point of view of the offset, needs to be not a level playing field. It needs to be better for Australia in order to attract that talent, in order to attract that overseas investment, which I think is going to be really interesting over the next few months as these things are finalized.
Yeah,
I talked at the beginning really briefly about the joint effort that was in play in order to deliver this tax offset, and the announcement of the budget was really just the start of the hard work. And you know, I'd call out Ron Curry from IGEA and Raylene Knowles and their team, who are working tirelessly to represent the industry and to put us in a space where, you know, Swedish businesses will want to come and invest in Australia. It's yeah, we're on a path, but we're on a great path right now.
Thank you, Roger. So Camilla, I realized, because we joked when we started that we have content for about 3 hours. We're not going to run through everything, obviously, but do we have time for one more question, or do you want to?
Yeah, I think, yeah, one more question, and then we have a couple of questions in the chat as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I know it's loads of interesting content here. We can also put it up on the website, more information together with some of your slides as well there, maybe, Tomas. But yeah, I think one more question, and then we'll open it up for the audience here. I'll
try to combine all of our remaining questions into one, Roger. So no, but you lots of software businesses have moved to subscription-based models. So has gaming. In gaming, you talk about gaming as a service. So you launch a game, and then you service the game, and you service your players, and you provide new content, often in return for subscription-based models, but it could be other monetization models. What's being discussed a lot now is also gaming as a platform, as a potential next, or it's actually here, but it's an evolution where gamers they go to the platform, which is the game, not only to play the actual game, but to do other things. So, which has, it's a very big social aspect to it. So my question is, with gaming as a platform, or sometimes you refer to this as a metaverse, or you even bigger terms, what's that in, is that a good thing in COVID times? Can gaming help?
Yeah. Look, I think gaming as a service is here to stay. That kind of subscription model is here to stay. I think, one key aspect of the way in which the pandemic, or the relationship between the pandemic, the lockdowns, and gaming, if you think about 2020, the year of lockdown, and you think about the way in which people were isolated, it's absolutely the case that gaming as a service, something like Fortnite or Apex, or other games like Among Us, for example, those games offered gamers the opportunity to share an experience, sat on their sofa, and I have a real kind of personal example in this space, because my 16-year-old son has been gaming with his friends during the pandemic. He's been playing a whole bunch of different games that are, maybe some free-to-play ones, but also some stuff that is subscription. And what's been great, and I think, if you ask a lot of parents and a lot of people have had this experience themselves, the social aspect where, certainly he and his friends have been connected. They connect on Discord, and they use the voice chat on Discord, but it's been a catalyst for them to come together, to connect, to share experiences in the way that they might normally do in real life. And for me, I look at that, and often our industry, the games industry, is portrayed in a negative light. But when I think about this example, and the comfort that I know, and the joy that I know it's brought to my son and his cohort, and I can only imagine that's a phenomenon that's much broader than that. I think it's incredibly positive. So that's where I think we're at in terms of the pandemic, and kind of that shared gaming as a service piece. Gaming as a platform, we can talk about Fortnite and concerts on Fortnite. We're not quite there yet. There are different servers. You're not there with everyone in the same space. So we're not quite there in the kind of metaverse discussion. The metaverse piece, Epic raised another $1 billion or something recently for their metaverse endeavors. I think 200 million of that came from Sony. So look, there's plenty of people who are buying into the metaverse, and this idea that there will be, who thought Second Life would come back again, but
Second Life.
The metaverse as a concept. Zuckerberg did an interview recently and talked about the fact that the way that things are moving, rather than video conferencing, you would be a hologram, he would be a hologram sat on the sofa in your room, and you'd be the hologram sat on the sofa in his room. Yeah, look, after Cambridge Analytica, I'm not sure I want Zuckerberg wandering around my house looking at my photos, but the metaverse thing, there are so many questions around, digital ownership, NFTs, how you translate assets across games, what's the legislative framework, what are the ethical questions, the commercialization piece, how do businesses, put aside their own individual commercial interests and do something that's good for everyone. There are so many, I think so many questions yet to be answered, but certainly these trends, are going to be the things that shape our industry over the coming years, I think, and in ways that I think we can't yet imagine.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. So Camilla, do you want to? Did you have questions?
Yeah, so we have a question from Jonas Lindholm here. So we mentioned free to play, but also can you mention the emerging hype on the online with play to earn games? So like Axie Infinity, based on the blockchain and crypto technologies. Is this something Embracer is looking into as well?
I don't know, is the honest answer. I'm not close enough to that to be able to comment on it, I'm afraid. So that's not a great start with the Q&A.
No, I can say a few words. Not directly about play to earn, but I recently had the chance to do a transaction with the buyer was a company called Animoca. They used to be was an Australian company. They're now headquarters are in Hong Kong, and they focus only on blockchain gaming and non-fungible tokens, digital tokens. So it's definitely a growing area. I can't say, but they have that aspect where you play, and there are professional players in the games making real money on the blockchain. So it's definitely coming. Whether this will be mainstream or not, I think that's way too early to say. Thanks for the question, Jonas.
Yeah, just on that, I think there's also a challenge around blockchain when we talk about NFTs and actually earning in gaming, where you look at the technology that's in play at the moment around blockchain, and you look at 60 frames a second refresh rates in gaming. There's definitely a disconnect there between the two things. That when you talk about permanent digital ownership and earning real money, there's definitely a disconnect there in terms of the technologies that need more work as well.
Right, and then the other question that we have is also from Jonas, another Jonas Pilhage, who is asking, where are the developers found around the globe, like the key developers?
Here, there, and everywhere. Sweden, Coffee Stain, for example. Our most recent earnings call, we talked about the acquisition of 8 businesses, 5 of which were in Sweden, small development businesses. But the UK, the US, Singapore, pretty much everywhere except Australia. And I say that tongue in cheek because we do have some amazing development businesses here, including Sledgehammer, who are in Melbourne. We have a whole bunch of homegrown as well as international players in the market. Game Loft in Brisbane, for example, Mighty Kingdom in Adelaide. But in large part, we are not in the same space as most other places. Our whole industry, in terms of development, is smaller than a single Ubisoft studio in Canada, where there are 3,000 people. And we've got about half that working in the development industry generally. So the thing about development is you can pretty much set up and do it anywhere.
I agree. And there's also another perspective. As games grow, certain games grow bigger and the production budgets just get bigger and bigger, just like film. There's also a specialization ongoing in development where you separate the creative process from the actual building of the game. So you will see, and we're already seeing, obviously, a low-cost country specializing in providing certain elements of the game development. So you can create the game here or in Stockholm, and then you can just outsource. You can have 100 artists, because some games will actually need 100 artists. working on the graphics for your game, and they can be based in Thailand or Vietnam or what's big in Eastern Europe. So
yeah, Russia, for example. Yeah, no, that's a great point, and I think part of the challenge for us as we talk about the Australian case study and we talk about the tax offset is how we keep that onshore, because those are the jobs that are transferable. Those are the jobs that move to medicine. Those are the jobs that move to engineering, because they use, you know, Unity or Unreal engines, and those are the transferable tools and skills that we need, you know, in technology jobs in adjacent and kind of other industries. So it's a great point, and something that needs to be top of mind for us as we move forward, I think, as an industry.
Great. Well, yeah, very good point. I think that's all the questions we have in the chat here, and it has been really interesting. I'm sure we could carry on for a much longer time. We will post this recording as well on our website for anybody who missed it or want to look back again at it. And then maybe we can share some of your slides that you had prepared, Tomas, as well, as a link on the website. But thank you so much, everybody. And we might need to do a follow-up gaming online event, looks like. Yeah, thanks so much, Tomas and Roger. Great input. I certainly learned a lot about this industry. I have very keen gamers at home here, so it's good to know a little bit about the actual volume and size and how important this industry has become. So thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. And
thanks, Roger. Thanks, Tomas.
Pleasure. If anyone does have any questions like Tomas, they can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to catch up with people outside of this.
Perfect. Thank you. Good
Great.
night.
Thank you. Thanks. Have a nice evening.